Every man or woman of God needs an education. Now, there are different kinds of education, and we find that Moses had a special kind of education. And I believe that every man or woman of God needs the kind of education that Moses had. You say, what was his education? He went to God's school. And by the way, that school was not an easy one. It was a difficult one. For you see, Moses grew up and he was young and he was powerful. He was the son of the Pharaoh's daughter. Of course, he was truly a Hebrew. And during that time, he went out, and according to Exodus chapter 2 and verses 11 through 15, he saw his people being mistreated. And so what he did was he took things into his own hands and he killed an Egyptian. And as a result of that, he had to flee. And he fled into the Midianite desert, and there is where he went to school and received his education, because it was in the Midianite desert that he went to the University of Humility. And it was at this university that he learned how to become a man of God. And when he graduated from that university, he went back, not in the power of his own flesh, not in the power and strength of military might, but he went back in the might and the power of God. And oh, what we need today is we need a generation who've been to God's school. Now, first of all, we need to understand that the door was opened to go to that school through failure. You see, he went out and he failed. He tried to do the right thing, but he messed up. He blew it. But God restored him. That's exactly where God wanted him to be, because you see, we cannot become what God wants us to become until we have humility in our hearts. And he grew up with that strength and that power in the courts of Egypt, and he needed to become a humble man. So when he went to school, there were 3 courses he had to take. The first one was this: he had to learn to do God's work in God's time. Now, he saw God's people suffering. He knew that he was a Jewish person of the children of Israel, and he wanted to do something for his people, and he tried. But he didn't understand this one thing: God's work must be done in God's time. And in God's time, God will do extraordinary things. And so many times we get ahead of God or we go too far behind God. We need to just walk with him, and in his time, he will accomplish that work. The second thing that he needed to learn was that he needed to learn that God's work must be done in God's power. You see, he tried to do the work of God by his own strength. He had learned all the military maneuvers and things and strategies and power from Egypt. But you see, that's not the way God's work is done. It's not done in the power of the human flesh. Yes, he killed that Egyptian, but do you know what? It accomplished nothing to help the children of Israel. The work of God must be done in the power of God. And then there was a third lesson that he had to learn, and a course that he had to take, and that was a course in humility. He went from being in the court of the Pharaoh's daughter to being a nobody in the Midianite desert. And there he learned humility. And at the right moment and the right time, God came to him, God appeared to him, and Moses became God's man. Do you want to become God's woman, God's man? Do you want to become a person that God uses? Then you must be willing to go to God's school. You must be willing to enroll in the University of Humility.